Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. We have Randy Fertel. He's a writer, scholar, and philanthropist, best known for his work exploring the intersections of improvisation, culture, and politics. Randy holds a PhD in English and American literature from Harvard and has taught at institutions such as Harvard and Tulane. His previous works include A Taste for Chaos, The Art of Literary Improvisation, and The Gorilla Man and the Empress of Steak, a memoir of his family's New Orleans culinary legacy. And he's the president of the Fertel Foundation and the Ruth U. Fertel Foundation, supporting various cultural and educational causes. And his latest book, Winging It, Improv's Power and Peril in the Time of Trump, delves into how improvisation shapes our world, from the arts and neuroscience to politics and social media. Randy, it's a pleasure to have you on, and thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, what I love so much about the book, the work, it's like it covers so many different things. And I can't wait to get into the neuroscience of it. I like the characters that you talk about. So there's just so much here. It's so, I guess, full of life, honestly. So as we tend to do, we're going to begin with a quote from the book. And so Randy wrote, here's a famous example of yes and in the jazz setting. Jazz keyboardist Herbie Hancock recounts that in the mid 1960s, he played a blatantly wrong chord during a Miles Davis quintet gig. Hancock's bad chord, meant to be a simple handoff to Miles, hung out there, Hancock said, like a piece of quote unquote rotten fruit. Miles pauses for a fraction of a second, quote unquote, Hancock wrote, and then, quote unquote, he plays some notes that somehow miraculously make my chord sound right. In that moment, I believe my mouth actually fell open. What kind of alchemy was this? What kind of alchemy? It was the yes and kind of alchemy, engineered by the rule of agreement, the kind where the improviser makes an offer and her partner, attending with all her senses, picks it up and makes a counteroffer. Such call and response is alchemical. It transforms culture. We take it on faith that effective narrative demands conflict. John and Mary wed, but, and you're in a Tennessee Williams play, the rule of agreement begs to differ that conflict is the only way forward. John and Mary wed and constellates a community. Jazz improvisation transformed a global popular culture in the first half of the 20th century. If jazz has since then lost its ascendancy in the cultural marketplace, improv's dominance in film and TV helps explain the rush to improv clubs and classrooms. Actors who got their start at Chicago's founding improv theater, Second City, or similar tropes from coast to coast soon peopled the Saturday Night Live stage. I can't wait to talk about this. John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, Mike Myers, Jim Carrey, among many. Comedy improv led to some of the highest grossing films of the 1980s and beyond. Harold Ramis' Caddyshack, Ivan Reitman's Ghostbusters, Christopher Guest, This is Spinal Tap, that was a good one, and Best in Show, The Farley Brothers, and Best in Show, and The Farley Brothers, Dumb and Dumber, or any of Judd Apatow's minor masterpieces, including the 40-year-old version. So yeah, so this is like so much great stuff, man. I just especially the comedy stuff, because we over here are like huge fans of Saturday Night Live. So first, let's actually, Randy, get into what improv is and what are the facets that make it up.
So for me, improv is defined by presenting something that presents itself as impromptu, as made up in the moment of composition. Mm-hmm. And but the first thing I do, having offered that definition, is I say, listen, there's no right amount of presentness, of freshness, of impromptu-ness. It's a matter of degree. But the real matter is just the gesture. Listen, I've given this no thought, so trust me. I've got authority because I've not worked on this. I've got authority because it's coming from my instincts and my intuition rather than from my prefrontal cortex. So I'm sure I'm the first to say that the problem with conversations about improv is that they bog down in splitting hairs. Is it really improvised? And I call this the Goldilocks gambit. Goldilocks wonders if it's truly improvised. Is it improvised enough that we can call it improvised? Or she might say, maybe it's improvised too much to call it art. Or finally, she might say, oh, it's improvised just the right amount. So that splitting hairs, it ends the conversation. When we miss the real heart of the gesture, which is has a rhetorical persuasive force. Trust me, because I've given this no thought, which is on when you present it bare bones, is absurd. Why would we trust someone who's not given something thought? And yet there's a part of us, because of the hot cold cognition, the different kinds of attention that our brain undertakes. There's a part of us that really responds to the intuitive.
Yeah.
And Daniel Kahneman, the great economist, Nobel laureate, says it turns out there's no correlation between intuition and accuracy. But if something comes to us out of the blue, we'll identify it as intuitive and we'll lend it some credence, maybe more than we should. I mean, how many times has spontaneity led you astray?
Yeah.
How many times have your intuitions, how many bad dates have you had because of your intuition? But notice that, in what you read and in this chatter here, it touches everything. Improv touches everything. I'm kind of like that guy in A Beautiful Mind who finds connections to everything. Of course, he turned out to be psychotic, so watch who's talking to you. But
Yeah.
I find improv everywhere, and it's been very exciting using this lens that I just stumbled on.
And yeah, the core of improv, I mean, it seems to me that the moment something sort of just comes out of someone, whether it's intuitive or just kind of like, something that happens in the moment, you trust it because it feels very authentic, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it feels authentic.
yeah, because there's
Which
no
which
thought.
we
Yeah.
and then we lend it authority because it's authentic.
Yeah, it seems like the art of improv is also that if you could kind of get out of your own way, or if you sense somebody else got out of their own way, like there's no
Uh-huh.
ego, right? There's not something sort of inhibiting their sort of self-expression when you could sort of sense that this thing is just coming just straight from them, like that sort of intuitive feel. It feels more real to you than something that's just like constructed by someone, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Trump gets lots of credit because he doesn't read white papers on NATO,
Yeah.
and Clinton gets thrown in the ditch because she writes them.
Right.
And so, we his base is not alone in giving credence to intuition and the unconstructed, the unprepared. And yet, there's a time and place for both.
Right.
Yeah, I think.
And
Mhm.
and like Kahneman says, there's no correlation between intuition or authenticity and accuracy. I mean, Trump is very authentic, but I don't think I want to go to dinner with him.
Mhm.
He's authentically an asshole, excuse my French.
No, for sure.
So,
I
yeah.
think what was so probably refreshing about Trump initially, right, is
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
no one was used to any of
Yeah.
our politicians sort of improvising, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
like, oh, okay, wow, this is very different from our usual politicians. He feels more honest, right? And
Yeah.
this is very disarming, right? Because
Disarming. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, so I noticed, because I'm obsessed with improv. Um, I noticed right away in 2015 that the commentators were all pointing to this improvisational quality in Trump, and they said he's such an improviser. And the next statement was he could never win.
Mm.
Who would vote for an improviser?
Mhm.
Right? So they
yeah,
dismissed it, missing the power of this trope. So that's what I bring to the table. That, there are a lot of explanations of the mystery of his power over his base. And my little offering is part of it is his improvising, his spontaneity, his going off prompter, his you know, standing up after being hit in the ear by something and saying fight, fight, fight. I mean, that was a great improvisation.
Yeah.
Del
Yeah.
Close would have been proud of that.
Yeah, and we could use, so I'm a psychotherapist by trade, and so
Uh-huh.
we could even use clinical psychology to try to understand it. So like in our field, even though we have manual based therapies, which are really effective, just to be clear, like I mean they're pretty much scientifically validated for
Wait,
the
wait, wait,
most.
wait, wait. Manual based?
Yeah, manual based therapies like cognitive
What's that
behavioral.
mean?
Also, like
Oh,
cognitive
okay.
behavioral therapy, acceptance, commitment, right? So these are
Okay.
all, like these are
Gotcha.
pretty much manuals,
Okay.
right? So yeah, if you're like taking a training course or something, you're
Yeah.
pretty much following a script, right? So here's the interesting thing about psychotherapy, right? And I think this is what really appeals about Trump. So a lot of times patients don't like it. It really depends on who you're at, or who you're, I guess, what type of therapist you're looking for. But a lot of patients don't like it, right? So especially with the deeper personality work, a lot of times it just doesn't go well, especially in the beginning. So, but what tends to actually work, so there's this existential psychotherapist named Irv Yalom. So Yalom talked about the throw-ins of therapy. So these are just kind of like off the cuff and maybe like offhanded comments that a person makes.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you're kind of just saying it and you're just reacting in the moment, right? Whatever it may be. I try my best not to even like replicate them on the show because it just is disingenuous. I really,
Mm-hmm.
really can't say what they are, but you know it when you're in it and when you're feeling it. So that's what I think makes Trump so appealing. Whereas somebody like a politician, like an Obama, right? A career politician, if they're reading off a script, right, it sort of feels like, well, this person is doing it because they're trying to get ahead, etc., right? These
Yeah.
personal reasons. And so what a lot of times happens is in therapy, people think, well, you're just following a manuscript because you're doing your job, you're trying to get paid, etc., right? But when you have these throw-ins, when you have these lines that again come from nowhere, right? Seemingly, but they really
Mm-hmm.
come
Mm-hmm.
from this inner core where you feel like, as a patient, where you feel truly understood. Not only
Mm-hmm.
truly understood, but you feel like this person has gone off script for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he cares so, or she, because they care about you so much, and that actually hits. That's what I think appeals to Trump's base because he's going off script for these people. It's almost like, and this is what I've heard people say, it's almost like when he's talking into the camera, it's as though he's talking directly to them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, he has that power. And the improviser superpower is listening.
Hmm.
And Trump is not going to listen to you or me, and he's not going to listen to the grown-ups in the room, but he listens to his base.
Yeah.
And the best example of that, it's in the book, is that apparently it's documented that for a certain speech, his handlers wanted him to talk about the immigration problem, which, of course, is meat and potatoes for Trump. And so they, just gave him this prompt. He turned it into a thing. He didn't speak in the abstract. He said, "We're going to build a wall. We're going to make the Mexicans pay for it." And the response, the explosive response he got from the audience was so terrific that it became a plank in his platform, and then a presidential policy, which was bogus. That not much of it was built, but
Yeah.
a lot of airspace got used talking about it. So that's his listening power. He knows how to, so I'm going to make a leap here. The algorithm that runs social media was given one prompt. It said, get more eyeballs, get more, what's the word? Not exposure. Anyway, more eyeballs
Mm-hmm.
on our social media,
Well,
Facebook or whatever.
clicks, yeah.
Yeah, more clicks.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't told how to get them, but it was given machine learning, and it went into the black box. The prompt went into the black box, where we're not sure what happened, except that we know it went out and scraped the electronic universe, and it came back, and with the realization that the best way to get more clicks is with fear and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the like button and the friends button or the way to get those dopamine hits that and fear and anger is the best way to get more of them. And so that casino in our pocket that people talk about is all based on that general principle that fear and anger gets more clicks.
Right. Yeah, and
It's
when
scary.
when it comes to improv, right? So somebody reading the book or somebody listening to your podcast, our talk or whatever,
Uh-huh.
they might ask, okay, but how does somebody kind of get good at it, right? So
Mhm.
I think the conception of it usually is pretty black and white, where the thinking is you have to be like a creative genius for it. But I think
Mhm.
from a lot of what you say is basically there's sort of a foundation of it, right? You talk about the different sort of thinking styles. So can you get into what they are and how do they apply here?
You mean the neuroscience of hot and cold
Yeah.
cognition,
Yep.
or
Yep.
yeah?
Yep.
So we have one brain, but in that brain we have two kinds of attention. We have fast thinking and slow thinking. We have
Hmm.
hot cognition and cold cognition, depending on which neuroscience you're talking to.
Yep.
And these are bioevolutionary developments. Cold cognition is the prefrontal lobe. It's what developed last. It's our rationality. It's our executive function. It works by largely by predictive um, cognition. It sees something and it interprets it in terms of yesterday or last week because it uses less glucose that way. It's lazy.
Hmm.
Um, Hot cognition is all about the present moment. It uses up a lot of glucose because its bioevolutionary chore is to check to notice anomalies that might be a red-tailed hawk or a tiger or
Hmm.
something that is going to come eat you. So it doesn't work predictively. It's totally in the moment. This is improv's uh, uh, kind of attention.
Hmm.
And so when the tiger comes through the bamboo break, you're running because of hot cognition. You're running even before you think tiger or think run because your embodied emotions are picking up the tingling in the air from the presence of this big cat. And so cold cognition gets a Darwin Award, gets eaten by the tiger,
Hmm.
and hot cognition goes on to live another day. So improv, here's another leap. The more I think about it, and this isn't in the book as much as maybe it could have been, the more I think about it, what improv comedy delivers on a nightly basis on thousands of stages in America is agency, a
Hmm.
sense of I can get this done. And think about it. Agency is something that we don't that we're losing, a sense of agency we're losing. If that algorithm which directs us to click on that jeans ad on Facebook.
Hmm.
Well, when we click on it, whose agency was that? Who was the one who clicked? Was it us or was it the algorithm?
Hmm.
Um, and the NSA probably heard our last conversation. It's probably listening now.
Hmm.
Um, the tax man knows everything we bought and everything we've earned.
Yeah.
So when when we act, who's acting? Uh, uh, so and so I think that comic improv has this dominance now in the popular culture, in part because it has a kind of compensatory. It delivers a compensatory effect that you too can have this agency, this call and response, this
Hmm.
quick yes and um, agency. And is that illusory? I don't know, but is it momentary? Probably.
Hmm.
Do we go home with a more agency in our pocket? I don't know, but it's my job's to understand what's going on, not to uh, evaluate.
Right.
So
No, and that's fair. Totally fair. And I know what you
mhm,
mean too, because like, right, like that's like we could get into free will, right? I mean, how much,
yeah,
yeah, are you
Sapolsky, if you,
Mhm.
yeah,
yeah,
totally fair. However, I'm more with you in the sense that like it still feels like agency when you really are, intuiting something or, actually improvising, or if that comedian on stage is doing that and you could
uh,
really see them being, again, using the word authentic, there's a different sort of feeling that it sort of elicits from you than
yeah,
these like um sort of like you said, like for example, if we're on social media and we're just getting fed things that we already like. I mean, is it that you're choosing that thing
hmm
to
hmm
click on, or are you being conditioned to keep clicking things like that? How many other things are you conditioned to do throughout the day? But when you're
yeah.
actually present to the moment, and improv is really, that's a direct way to being present in the moment, right? uh, how often is somebody in that mode, right? Unless they're
Right.
practicing, I guess, meditation, or if they're really, really well read in philosophy and, have practiced this stuff for years. Like improv is like a very natural sort of way to kind of get you there,
Well,
right?
so
So,
improv definitely fits with your title, Seize the Moment.
Mm.
yeah.
It's all about being present. My friend Stephen Nachmanovich wrote a terrific book, Free Play, which, God, I don't know how many languages it's been translated around the world. And his new book is called The Art of Is,
Mm.
which is to say the art of presence, of
Mhm.
being present.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to push back a little on your title. Um, so, yes, improv is about seizing the moment. It's about being in the present and call and response. You don't have time to think about it. You just have to do it.
Mhm.
So that's true. But the more I thought about improv over the years, the more I realized that it goes beyond seize the day,
Hmm.
beyond carpe diem. Here's the problem with carpe diem. I'll tell you the whole epiphany that I had.
Mhm.
I
Please.
was on my way to Sydney to give a paper about my last improv book. And my girlfriend's birthday was the day we landed. And so I had to do something for her. So I got tickets to the Sydney Opera. And and it was La Traviata about the courtesan, um, the fallen woman.
Mhm.
And it starts with a Carpe Diem song.
Mm.
She's just out of the consumption hospital, and everyone's happy and hoping she's going to be well. And there's a guy who's trying to get in her bed, and she asks him to sing a drinking song, which is to say a Carpe Diem song.
Mhm.
And so he does, and it's rousing, and everybody, it's a famous song. And before I fell asleep from my jet lag, I had this epiphany. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Carpe diem, consumptive courtesan. That's the problem with carpe diem. You're seizing the day because you're saying that the moment is evanescent. Life moves on. You have to grab it now.
Mm.
But improv comes along with something even bigger than that, something
Hmm.
stronger, more robust. It says, yes, it's true. Yes, it's true that life is evanescent. It's also fecund.
Yep.
It's also fertility. It's the cornucopia, that the horn of plenty that keeps filling itself. And improv goes beyond carpe diem to carpe vitam, to seize life. So you started, Leon started talking about my book being full of life, I think.
Mm.
And I wrote that down because that's what improv is full of.
Mhm.
There are no mistakes. you use the Hancock story.
Mhm.
There are no mistakes in improv, which means in part that everything around us you can make art of.
Mhm.
A big part of improv is tinkering, bricolage,
Mhm.
making stuff that exists around you and give it a new purpose and a new artistic power.
Mhm.
So that is really central to improv, that everything is fair game for your artistic palette. And that fits with this larger um, uh, challenge to carpe vitam, seize life.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and then yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add, yeah, well, for example, comedians, right?
Uh-huh.
They could take something tragic. Now, you can argue whether, because obviously they prepare sets, so I guess we'd have to rely on more of an improv comedian for this example, but yeah, they could take tragedy and
Yeah.
make comedy out of it. They take the most like sacred in terms of something. No, they could take the most taboo sort
Uh-huh.
of subject and then create art out of it or bring levity to something maybe tragic, right?
Yeah.
And nothing is off limits with that art, and that's something I really respect. And I wasn't we're not going to go too much into this, but like for example, there's a lot of people who have problems with comedians making like certain kinds of taboo jokes,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
personally I do not agree with that. I think making fun of the most like sacred or taboo things and adding that light to it makes us a little less rigid
Yeah.
around those subjects. And
Well,
yeah.
improv's all about embracing fluidity, embracing flow, embracing pliability. And so yeah, that fits. Um, you kind of stumbled on the Goldilocks problem there because you wanted to know, is it improv enough? Um, I make the distinction between stand-up and improv comedy. That stand-up, there was a friend of mine, it got to interview Seinfeld, and in GQ, I think,
Hmm.
maybe Vanity Fair, but um, at a certain point, Seinfeld said, when you're up there, you have such mastery, you have such control, and you can see him digging that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, and when I heard that, it's like, yeah, that's not what comic improvisers do, because they are yes and they are not in control. They are letting go of mastery,
Yeah.
and out of that comes the mystery of creation. Um, so, but the of course, stand-up comedians improvise with hecklers, when hecklers come up. But for the most part, they've fine-tuned those each joke over many long hours of uh, you know, I
Right.
forget what they call it. So, but I'm not saying that improv has to be purely impromptu, because the epigraph to my book is Oscar Wilde's really, for me, important statement. The master of paradox. He says, spontaneity is meticulously prepared art.
Mhm.
And so I'm fine with someone who's done the same improv a zillion times. But there's that first and foremost, it's how it's presented. A friend, and in a recent podcast, challenged me that it seems like everything is improv in your world, Randy, and it's not true. There are people like Seinfeld and Flaubert, if you want to go to the arts, the literary art, who present themselves as great craftsmen who
Mhm.
have polished and want you to see the polish. Um, Horace says, don't publish for 9 years. Let it sit. Let it, let polish it for 9 years. Flaubert and Horace are the ultimate craftsmen, and not, well, Horace has a lot to say about improv, but the way he presents himself is as craftsman. And so for me, there are two worlds. There's the world that the frontal lobe can help you present in a better way, and there's the world that is good only if you let the frontal lobe go. But it is a meticulously prepared art, so there's a lot of homework that
Right.
goes into that power of improvisation. And Quintilian said it in the 2nd century AD that all this hard work in this book of actually 9 books of rhetoric up to this point, he's in the 10th book of his rhetoric, and he says all this hard work that I've given you is the result is improvisation. When you
Right.
let all that hard work go.
Oh, I see. So
See?
yeah, and there is something in the book in regards to like it's sort of like an emergent, like you do
Yeah,
the hard work, and then when
yeah.
you actually let go, the emergence of all the different kinds of hard work that you did before kind of arises in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, now,
Emergence is a big part of my understanding of improv. And one of the books that had a big impact on me was James Glick's Chaos, the Emergence of a New Science. And the chaos science is the science of emergent order. So turbulence
Yeah.
under certain conditions will order itself. And that's what improvisations do. They're chaotic, and yet um, an order emerges. And so, the craftsman can present an order that's kind of enclosed,
Mhm.
and the improviser sets the conditions so that an order emerges, which isn't walled off. It can, who knows where it will go.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that was my question earlier, right? How do you kind of merge the cognitions in a way where improv becomes a possibility? Where the idea was, and I mean, other thinkers have said this too, where the idea is if you with system two thinking, let's say, where if you practice it enough, you reason enough, you gain these truths or whatever, whatever you want to kind of call them. What happens is that it becomes more and more intuitive. So it's like you're kind of polishing your intuition with your
yeah.
reason. So right, yeah. And it's interesting as you were saying that, as I was thinking. So I don't know. I know you mentioned before you're not like really well versed in pop culture, but the rapper Eminem. So he's a
Uh-huh.
freestyler. He's really great at this. He's probably one of the world's best. So what he does is he literally just reads a bunch of shit that has nothing to do with rap. So he'll read about like
Uh-huh.
agriculture, politics, obviously. And so what he'll do is as he's reading this stuff, he gets like different ideas and different words, metaphors,
Yeah.
especially. So for him, the idea was, and again, I'm sure this is not specific to him, but the point is to say that if you're well versed in so many different things, which again is incredibly real fucking hard. But if you're well versed in so many different things, especially if you want to speak in metaphor, and especially if you're an improv comedian, the idea is that you can take it in so many different directions because there's a lot
Yeah.
of that stuff still remains. So yeah, you'll have Eminem talking about shit that makes people go, "What the fuck? How did he even know that? Where's that even
Yeah.
coming from?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in improv comedy, the greats like Del Close and the geniuses who helped develop this form, um, they insist that the players work hard, they read steadily in the daily newspaper and whatever, because you need to bring a lot to the table. He says, if you treat your audiences like poets and geniuses, you'll do fine.
Hmm.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, that's a far cry from Trump treating his base like the basest of animals.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's super interesting, by the way, because in graduate school, one of our professors actually told us that about therapy. And like for us at the time, we're like, wait,
uh,
how is any of this stuff relevant? Yeah, yeah. So
uh,
he says something along the lines of he says, just I'm obviously this is not verbatim, but he says something along the lines of like, look, if you guys learn about a bunch of different subjects, economics, politics, whatever,
yeah,
chemistry, neurochemistry, neuroscience. So the idea there is that he's like, you'll be able to bring a lot of that stuff into the consultation room. And like after years, you finally get it. You're like, okay, cool, because people have different interests. They want to talk
yeah,
about different
yeah,
things. They
Yeah.
want to be understood in ways that maybe the
yeah.
average person might not get them.
They want to
So,
be
but
heard.
Yes,
They
yeah, yeah,
want to
yeah.
be heard.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So at the time, we're thinking like, oh my God, this is such a burden, like to learn all of these different things. But he was really right. To be a great
Yeah.
therapist, like you really have to be well versed in many different subjects.
Well, my book is very far ranging, and it's because I'm a dilettante. In an academic world, you're not allowed to leave your silo. You have to
Mhm. Yeah.
stick with this. And when I brought this idea of a dissertation on improvisation to my professors at Harvard, that was going to cross centuries rather than just 1 month of a poet's life,
Mhm.
they looked at me like I was crazy. But I was audacious or arrogant, and I plowed through and I did it. Um, and so to the academic world, I'm a dilettante
Mhm.
because I don't stay focused. I
Yeah.
go into other disciplines. I cross centuries. Um, so that invited me over the years to think about a definition of dilettante. A dilettante is a polymath that didn't add up to much. And so my work on improv is my effort to seem to have add up to something.
Mhm.
And I think it does. I think it does. I'm proud of it.
Yeah. I hear you.
And it's something I wanted to ask about. So in your book, you discuss sort of the role of psychedelics and
Yeah.
neuroscience and creativity. How do you think altered states of consciousness influence improvisation?
Well, a lot of these comic improvisers at the top of their game will tell you there's a kind of mind meld amongst the players that's just beyond normal and beyond. Uh, so anyway, so beyond normal, and so psychedelics. I had the opportunity to interview Michael Pollan and Mark Plotkin, who you know Pollan from his great book on how to change your mind.
Yeah.
Mark Plotkin is a New Orleanian, a friend who wrote a terrific book called um,
We can look it up. We can look it up.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's the Shaman's Apprentice.
Mm.
Lessons from the Shaman's Apprentice or something like that. Anyway, he's a ethnobotanist and he goes to Suriname and he lives with these almost uncontacted tribes and learns their medical, uh, looking for
Yeah. Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice. Hmm.
tales of a shaman's apprentice.
Hmm.
So I interviewed him, and the task was to connect improv and psychedelics.
Hmm.
And we all kind of generally agreed, yeah, there seems to be a connection. And we didn't quite get there that night. 700 people in the audience. Pollen's a big draw.
Yeah. Right.
Um, but as soon as I went back to his book, I found the connection.
Mm.
There is a diagram from some neuroscientists who measured um, the interaction between different parts of the brain on a placebo and then uh, on psychedelics on psilocybin, and it's this almost no connections between brain areas on the placebo, and it's this chaos so that's what improv is. It's the brain is firing in all kinds of different directions. I mean, you look at Hamilton, Lin-Manuel's Hamilton,
Mm.
and he's got this line about he's talking about finance. It's the debate between Jefferson and Hamilton, and he's talking about diuretics.
Hmm.
He's connecting taxes to diuretics.
Hmm.
Now, first of all, he's leaping centuries.
Right. Right.
But he had to have read something on uh, pissing,
Hmm. Hmm.
some medical thing on pissing to make that happen.
Mm.
So get those metaphors that Leon mentioned. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's you've got to have worked hard to learn the skill and to get the knowledge, to put the knowledge up there to work with. And then you have to have the bravado, the charisma, the flow state to make it happen, when, because you've got to come up with that rhyme word and the dilettantish metaphorical connection that you need to make this narrative proceed. And that's a challenge that these guys are amazing at.
Yeah. So, and this is actually something I wanted to ask you based on the podcast I was listening with you and Alan Alda. So you mentioned charisma. And so normally charisma is thought of as something that's more or less innate, like it can be kind of chiseled, but you're kind of bored with it for the most part. So what are your thoughts on charisma? And obviously in terms of improv, what are your thoughts on the people who are able to manifest it as opposed to those who aren't so much?
Well, I identify charisma with this flow state, with this state of high attention. You're in fast cognition, and but there's a dark side. Jamie, what's her name? Jamie. There's a New Yorker article. Oh no, it's Jameson. It's something Jameson. Has a essay on charisma, on empathy. I'm sorry, maybe I'm going astray here, but I'll just pursue it. So she says that empathy is always poised between gift and invasion. And there's a dark side to charisma too. Trump has charisma.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. And here's the irony about improv's charisma. You need to be in that flow state. You need to be in charisma to create these metaphors and these rhymes and whatnot. And as you do, you're drawing your audience into your community because they're following you. Maybe they're rhyming before you do. But so there's a bravado in pop culture, in hip hop culture. It goes too far, it becomes braggadocio. It's the really dark bravado, gangster rap, which now we see Sean Combs really fell into in the worst way. But even that is a kind of community. It's a community of gangsters. They fire weapons at one another, so it's not a healthy community. But anyway, in improv in general, you're building community. Trump's charisma builds community too, but it's a cult. And it's not a community that's enlarging, that grows emotionally because of this community. It's one that is torn apart by fear and anger. So I say that they're flip sides of the same coin, but one of the differences is that the community that improv generates is quite different from the cult that Trump generates.
Right. But also to add to that, so I now actually want to talk about Saturday Night Live. So what's interesting about that is that, there's this sense of I don't give a fuck when you're doing things like that. So Saturday Night Live was actually a really good example. And since you're mentioning the dark side of it, it made me think of the incident with Chris Farley. So this fucking guy, he literally pulled his pants down and took a shit out of a 14th floor window. And so they were all prone to doing stuff like that. John Belushi did even worse things, right? So the question I would have for you is, for somebody who who is a master, if you know, whatever, if you want to call it that, but for somebody who's really especially talented and really good at improv, right? Somebody with this high degree of charisma, because even though Chris Farley really struggled with self-esteem on the one hand, he actually
Mm.
was incredibly charismatic. So
Yeah.
one would ask, right? Especially again, because I really want to focus on Saturday Night Live. So for these people who were super phenomenal at what they did, right? Does that always carry that underbelly of that I don't give a fuck attitude where it's like, well, you know, you get the good with the bad?
Well, so to me, the first thing that all improv does is disrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're embracing disruption as a mode of art, well, what's going to stop you from going too far?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the dark side of improv is once you've thrown reason in the ditch, how do you reason people out of it?
Right.
But the just amongst these crazy guys like Belushi and what's his name?
Chris
Um,
Farley.
Chris Farley.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are outrageous, but they do outrageous for a living, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the samurai Belushi stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where he hits the desk with the samurai sword.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
Yeah.
both of those guys, you know, I'm from New Orleans, and both of those guys were going to play our great comic hero Ignatius um, in the Confederacy of Dunces, and
Mm.
both of them died before the
Wow.
production. So there seems to be a curse on that novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Oh, well, we've already gone past the topic when we
Okay.
were on psyched.
Oh,
So, I mean, I could get back to it,
sure.
sure. So, when we were talking about the relationship with psychedelics and improv,
Uh-huh.
two names came to mind. Actually, more than two. But
Hmm.
so, are you aware of either Terrence McKenna or
Sure.
yeah? So the funny thing is, so he's whenever he would speak, right? And he used to speak for hours, whether it was like a
Hmm.
lecture or a seminar, whatever. It felt like when he spoke, it felt like improv in a way. I mean, yes, he was talking about science, like definitely
Hmm.
like chemical interactions. I suppose if you're talking about mushrooms, like what is psilocybin, the history, all of that. But then there's other things he would talk about in terms of the state somebody would feel while ingesting it and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it almost felt like he was very poetic in a way sometimes in his speaking, and it was somebody who kind of gave me like a vibe of just like that person who learned a lot, right? And then when he actually spoke, it kind of came off
Right.
in a way improvised, and
Hmm. Hmm.
part of his charm, you could say.
By the way, can I
Hmm.
add to that really quickly? If
Sure.
if nobody knew, Danny Kahneman actually literally never created lectures. He just walked into classrooms and he
Hmm.
would just speak, and everybody's like, "How the fuck does he do that?" So, like somebody, I think one of his students or whatever, one I'm sure many students asked, but this was like a story. So one of his
Uh-huh.
students asked him one day. She said, "Wait, like you never have any notes? Like, do you prepare your lectures?" And he said, "No, I just come in and I talk."
He was brilliant.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, and also another person who came to mind was is Jason Silva. I'm not sure if you're
Hmm.
aware.
Don't know him. No.
So uh, he he was the host of a show called Brain Games.
Yeah.
He used to do in his early years debates and also freestyle rapping, actually.
Hmm.
But then there's a point later on in his career where he got very into concepts of flow, concepts, and then also into psychedelics, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he would make these sorts of videos, short videos, 2 to 3 minutes, also very visually stunning sort of videos as well. And he would speak like kind of off the cuff, very quickly and passionately, whatever the subject matter would be. And
Hmm.
you could tell it was completely improvised.
Hmm.
And even in his like movements of his body, like as he's speaking, just things would sort of come out of him. And it was almost as if he's just making it up on the spot, but it did sound very cohesive as well. And he's just
Hmm.
sort of a brilliant person at doing that. And I think he used his background with debating and freestyle, sort of rapping, or whatever it was that he
Yeah.
did in order
Yeah.
to make that sort of
I'll
content.
definitely look that up. That's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, Randy, my next question for you would be in terms of improv and in terms of actually studying it. So, what do you hope for the general reader to take away from it? Or what are the main elements of your work that you hope for the reader to take away from?
Well, you know, um, let me say something first. You mentioned earlier that um, I don't know much about pop culture, and there are lots of holes in my knowledge of pop culture. But actually, this book, which is only 200 pages long, started out as 455 pages, and
Wow.
we cut it down. We focused it to get it to the marketplace because we wanted it out before the election.
Hmm.
And so that the political argument is central. I mean, most of the book is a celebration of improv's power, but there's a big piece of it about its peril.
Right.
Um, so, but the part that I left behind, which is going to be the third in the trilogy of improv books, is about the emergence of global popular culture driven by improv all along the way.
Mm.
So I'm throwing myself into popular culture, and I'm glad to get these references so I can pursue them. The Eminem and the
Mhm.
Jason
Silva.
Silva.
Yeah.
So, but the takeaway from this book is, I guess, two. One is the glories of the power of improv, which my chapters on Fred Astaire and Hamilton and um, uh, psychedelics, and many more. The book is largely about that. But one of the takeaways, the thing that I really want people to see, is that this persuasive power of the gesture can be dark.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
it it there's a lot of truth in trust me because I've given this no thought because it means I'm being intuitive, and so maybe this is really something good.
Hmm.
Um, but when someone says my gut knows more than many brains, I say watch your wallet, watch your freedoms, watch your democracy,
Hmm.
because there's a dark side. There's the flip side of that same coin. The rhetoric of spontaneity is, um, you don't know when you seek inspiration, you don't know who's whispering in your ear.
Right.
Right.
If it's a muse or if it's some, you know, demon. Coleridge in Kubla Khan, which was written in a dream,
Hmm.
right? So he's got the rhetoric of spontaneity going on. And it's a celebration of inspiration, the poem is in general. But at the end of it, he says, beware, beware, pointing to the bard. Beware, beware, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise.
Well,
Weave a circle round him thrice. Beware, beware. So
Mm.
there's the improvise, the part of the Taste for Chaos book, the emphasis there is taste for chaos. Improvisers have a taste for chaos, but until Trump came along, no one swallowed it whole.
hmm.
Well, that's not true. There's some crazy guys back there in history who did.
Hmm.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah.
but for the most part, they're exploring this tension between the two sides of the brain. And I think just as they anticipated Freud, the great poets anticipated neuroscience in this. Actually, I've never put it that way. I'll have to remember that one. That was an improvisation.
Yeah.
Sounded brilliant. Yeah.
So I think the part of the takeaway is that this is part of our lives. This is everywhere in our lives. I mean, one of the wonderful gratifications of publishing this book and doing a wide social media outreach is how many um, posts and emails I get from friends or people just out of the blue who've read my stuff and call attention to some improvisation that is worth my attention. And usually, often, it's something fresh and new, and it's really gratifying to people. Or look, basically, that means that they're looking through this lens I stumbled on. This lens that, when if you look at improv in a broad way, just not worrying if it's truly improvised, not falling for the Goldilocks stuff,
Yeah.
and realizing that its main trope, I did this without thinking, is rhetorical, has persuasive power, even though improv is basically saying, hey, this is just for fun. We're just noodling here. But it has a persuasive power. And the frontal cortex is all about utility. What works? What's of value? Improv's all about fun, but it's also about challenging the frontal cortex and saying, life is not just about utility.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
is not, well, it's utile in some senses, but it's
Mhm.
not, we don't love for the utility of it. We love because it's a passion, it's an intuition, it's certain aesthetic qualities and
Yeah.
that go beyond reason.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. And then, so what would you say that people, or what would you recommend that people could do, or they should do, in terms of what they could think about, things that they could talk about, even? What can they do to protect themselves from the charm of the charismatic improviser?
yeah, well, so just be aware that there's a dark side to that gesture,
Mhm.
and check it out. When someone says, "Trust me, I've given this no thought,"
Mhm.
are they building community or are they building a cult?
Right.
And which do you want to be part of? So, part of the problem we face is this tribalism. And, when I talk about the cult and the base and, his tribe and all that, I'm falling into the tribalism that is the problem that we are going to face when he's long gone,
Mhm.
because he's inspired it. I mean, it's always been there,
Right.
but he's radicalized it. And if democracy is an improvisation, it's a conversation. It involves compromise. It involves persuasion. And all these things are lost when you have no facts to base your conversation on, and when you have no goodwill between the factions.
Mhm.
It's all bad faith now.
Yeah.
And so I have a friend who was very high in publications in America, and used to run People magazine.
Mhm.
And she said, "Oh, you got to take Trump out of your title. It's not going to be evergreen." And this was like 2 years ago,
Mhm.
long before it was a book. And I pushed back. I said, "No, he's going to be around. And
Mhm.
number two, even if he isn't, we're going to be dealing with the aftermath, because what he's brought to the table is trauma. He has really traumatized our democracy. And the only way to deal with trauma is to deal with it. You've got to go there. And, trauma breaks the life narrative. We all have a story that we tell ourselves to make sense of the world.
Mhm.
And trauma comes along and says, well, about Uncle John, no one prepared me for that.
Mhm.
So you have to go back there to the trauma. I'm thinking here of Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery.
Oh, we had her on the podcast.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, I
Yeah,
have to
she was
listen to that.
phenomenal. Yeah, she
Oh,
came out with
yeah.
the
I
book
talked to
last
her
year.
once about a project.
Yeah. No, we
Yeah,
don't
that
have it.
book
Yeah.
is terrific.
Yeah.
Um, and so it breaks the life narrative, and your job is to understand what happened. You have to, you may have effaced it in your memory, but you have to understand it. And then you have to create a new life narrative that incorporates the possibility that Uncle John could have done such a thing.
Mhm.
Now, once you've done that, you then have to socialize it. You have to re-socialize the life narrative because it may be a smaller audience than you had before who will understand this, but your life narrative, a life narrative that only you know is not a life narrative.
Mhm.
And so we have to learn to listen to those on the other side of the aisle. We have to learn to understand, Trump got his power because he listened.
Mhm.
He heard their distress from globalization and um, deunionizing and stuff like that. Not that he's pro-union,
Right.
but so we need to hear them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're like the Maenads in Euripides, the Bacchae, who are totally hallucinating. Uh, the main character tears her father apart, thinking he's a lion cub,
Mhm.
eats his flesh, and her father, or no, her grandfather, the founder of Thebes, says, when you come out of this, you're going to be very sad, but you need to come out of this.
Mhm.
And she comes out of it. So she comes out of her hallucination and her grandfather hears her and it helps. And we have to, I'm going one up on the base when I say, they are hallucinating. We're all hallucinating. We all make this narrative up, but there are degrees of hallucination, and theirs is pretty, extreme.
I love
And
that.
yeah,
I love that. And
I'm hoping we get a positive version of a Trump one day, or several versions. You know what I mean? Like somebody who kind of understands the elements of sort of not necessarily manipulation, but kind of like a positive sort of
a
way of
benevolent dictator.
sure, sure, sure.
I'm
Not
kidding. I'm kidding.
necessarily a
I'm kidding.
dictator,
I'm
but
kidding.
no, but someone with those sorts of like kind of improv qualities, like strong leadership, but then also kind of able to, I don't know, sort of become like a viral sensation, but kind of on the
I
positive
think
side.
that's what we're seeing in Kamala.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
I
AOC
think
too.
I in AOC too,
Yeah.
and in Kamala's laugh, I think is
yeah.
flow.
Mhm. Oh.
Hmm.
There's an openness in that laugh. I have a blog. My blog is fertel.com/blog,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and there's a blog in there about Kamala's laugh, and what a refreshing breath of air she has been. That first week when he stepped aside and she took the reins, did much of America not breathe a sigh of relief?
Mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of work ahead, but I think she's what you're describing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There was not sorry, she was doing a talk somewhere. This was within a week of her,
mhm.
kind of becoming
Announcing
the
her
new candidate.
candidacy. Mhm.
Yeah, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I heard a clip where at the very end of it, she says something like, "If you have something to say, say it to my face," or whatever. And then the whole crowd like goes up in a roar, and the way she delivered that as well, they were so into it. And like very cool, and then also her in the debate with Trump as well really handled herself
Oh, really
incredibly,
well,
actually.
really
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even did some tricks to kind of get him to react,
Yeah.
like
Oh
something
yeah.
about his
Oh yeah.
crowd
She
or
knew how
whatever.
to.
Yeah.
She knew how to uh, pull his chain,
Yeah. Yeah.
as Biden did in the State of the Union address
Yeah.
when he said, I know the Republicans want to sundown uh, Medicare and Social Security. And they said, "Oh no, we don't. No, we don't." And he said, "Oh, oh, well, that's good. I'll count on your vote."
Mhm. Yeah, that's super funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So as we get near the end, I think that's a great end point. So Alan, final questions for Randy before we go.
Oh, yes. If we wanted to follow you, follow your work,
Uh-huh.
and of course, buy the book, where can we do that?
So fertel.com
Mhm.
has my blog. It has access to getting the book on Amazon or at my local bookstore in New Orleans,
Mm.
Octavia Bookstore. There's a link to that.
Mm.
Of course, I'm on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that stuff, and so there are a bunch of podcasts that are listed in I forget what the navigation is, if it's events or something, or media or something, but
Mhm.
in fertel.com, if you wanted to hear my Alan Alda podcast, or one that I really treasure is the Second City, getting to Yes and.
Oh,
Those
cool.
guys are great. And I mean, those are my people, like, as are you. But it was Kelly Leonard is brilliant.
Mm.
Um, and we had a lot of fun. That was a few weeks ago. I have one coming out soon with Alice Waters,
Mm.
Cool.
and Davia Nelson, the kitchen sister, and a 2 hour long podcast that I did with Bret Easton Ellis, the
Wow.
American Psycho author,
Damn.
who happily did not bring his axe out of the closet.
Mhm.
Ah, that's good.
And we had a lot of fun. At the end of it, every time I brought up Trump, he would just let it pass.
Mhm.
And I'd listen to his podcast, and I figured out he was further right than me.
Mhm.
Then he was all prepared to do this. At the very end, he said, "So, tell me, what do you think of this Trump derangement syndrome?"
Mhm.
And I gave him a hard look, and I said, "I thought you were a right winger."
Mhm.
and and I said, "So you're saying I'm making all this stuff up, right?"
Mhm. Mhm.
So, the Trump derangement syndrome it's projection. I mean, they are all masters of here I'm
Mhm.
going
Well,
tribal here, but
that's
they
also
they
narcissism. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, they're so projective, and that is, I mean, they're the ones who, I mean, derangement, geez.
Mm.
So anyway, it was fun. I don't know how 2 hours is going to play, but he's a really intense and brilliant guy, and very literary. And so we like in that conversation about craft versus improv. I
Mhm.
said, Flaubert, and he said, "Oh yeah, Flaubert, he's the master." I
Mhm.
said, "See, you got it." So it was fun,
Very nice.
as was this.
Thank
We're
you.
so happy, Randy. This was excellent, man. This was
It's a real
literally a
pleasure.
wonderful way to spend the Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, I want to ask. I can't quite see your T-shirt. Does it
Oh,
say?
yeah. Hold on, let me see.
I may
I
be
may be
wrong, but
wrong.
it's
So,
highly
But it's
unlikely.
highly
so I have an
unlikely.
artist friend in New Orleans who
Mhm.
does these little, um, like folk art, like
Mhm.
placards,
Yeah.
and he posts them on telephone poles, and it
Mhm.
says, "Think that you might be wrong."
Mhm. I love that.
Isn't that good? And yours
Yeah.
is good too. But think that you might be wrong. That has great power. So,
Too much humility for me. I like this
Actually,
one.
I'm gonna get that shirt for
charisma
you.
charisma is a
Yeah.
state that doesn't abide being wrong. You're always
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Well, what were you gonna say, Alan?
I'm getting that shirt
Oh,
for
that.
him.
Oh, yo, you should get it
Or
for
maybe
yourself.
I'll wear it.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
wear it.
You wear it, and I'll
this
wear
shirt.
this
Yeah.
one. All right, Randy. Thank you so.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
y'all.
man.
Take care.
All
Thank
right, man. We'll
y'all.
talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right. That was fun. So, everyone, of course, if you'd like to follow us, you could follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. On X, we're at Seize_podcast. And of course, like, subscribe,
Hit
hit
the
the bell
bell
on
on
YouTube.
YouTube.
And again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.